My Adventures with Superman, Episode 7. Let's get right on into the review. So, the episode starts off with Superman. I always do that. Clark, he wasn't in his outfit. Clark is showing Jimmy and Lois the platform where his Kryptonian technology is. And there's not a lot to this scene. I mean, Jimmy's kind of geeking out in the background, seeing all the alien technology, but the main point of this scene is basically Clark asking Lois out on a date. So that's pretty much the driving force of the rest of this episode, more or less. The next day you see Clark in like this frantic panic because he's sitting here trying to plan out the date to the finest detail, and Jimmy's kind of looking like, you're losing your mind, man. I'm going over here and check on Lois. And then you see Lois, and she's basically frantic in a different way because she feels like she should get Clark this really good gift, and the best gift she could think of was to use her reporter skills to come up with some answers to, I guess, his arrival on Earth and more about I guess the government, what they want with him. I don't know. They didn't go into a lot of detail, and to be honest, I don't think it was one of the more important things about the episode anyway. So we get back to Clark, and he's visited by Mr. Mxyzptlk. And if you know anything about DC, if you know anything about Superman, you know who Mr. Mxyzptlk is. I'm gonna mess his name up a lot because that guy, ever since I was a kid and that guy showed up in the 90s, which he looked very different, by the way. I might throw up a picture of what he looked like back then. But ever since Mr. Mxyzptlk showed up back then, I've always remembered him because he's one of the most annoying characters you can come across in the comics. But he's also really funny. So he shows up to Clark's door and he's like, Superman, I need your help with this huge situation. Lois is in danger. And at first Clark is like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not Superman. And then Mr. Pellicle's like, yeah, whatever. Every universe Clark Kent is Superman. And he does this thing with his magic and he changes Clark into different versions of Superman. So you see like the 40s Superman from the old cartoon. You all might not even know what that is, some of you. And then he turns into like the Superman from like the 80s, that 70s, 80s range with the Super Friends. And then he turns into your boy, 90s Superman, Tim Daly, or if you want to say George Newman, but Tim Daly Superman, the 90s Superman. And I was just geeking out because I was like, yo, that's my Superman. It was probably my favorite part of the episode. In fact, it probably boosted this episode as far as like the 7 we have so far. It's probably one of my favorite episodes of the season just because of that. So anyway, again, if you know Mr. Mxyzptlk, you know that you really shouldn't trust anything he said. He's telling Clark he needs to take him on this mission to go save Lois, who's been kidnapped or something like that. Meanwhile, Lois and Jimmy are met by these new strangers who come through this portal, and then they take their helmets off, and they're basically Lois Lane. They're all Lois Lanes, or versions of Lois Lane. So this is a multiverse story. Well, a multiverse story of sorts. I know people are tired of multiverse stories, more or less, but this one's not really. I would say is light on the multiverse. So there's no need to be too tired. There's no need to be too tired of this one, right? But yeah, so they call themselves I can't remember what they call it. I'm calling them the Council of Loises, okay? Because it reminds me of the Council of Ricks and the Council of Reeds. But they have a particular name. I can't remember their name right now. But they're basically like the Council of Loises, and they're telling her that Clark is in danger. But at the same time, there's something they're keeping from Lois because they end up taking her and Jimmy to their ship where they come across more Loises, and they also come across a Jimmy variant, if you will, and it's just basically a female Jimmy. There's only one, even though they say there's there's Jimmy variants who are usually with them, but there's only one that you see in the episode. So meanwhile, with Clark and Mr. Mxyzptlk, they show up to this vault, and Clark is told by Pitlick that Lois is like through that door. So he opens the door and then gets hit by this security robot. And what we find out is that Mr. Mixapilly was after a recorder, like an old school tape recorder that reporters used to use. And we don't know what he needed it for until later on in the episode. But Superman ends up finding out that Mr. Piddly wasn't telling the truth, and he finds out he's basically a trickster and all that stuff. You know how that goes. And he pretty much tricks Clark through another portal. And we cut back to the Lois's, and basically she's kind of having a big conversation with the other Lois's, and they tell her to make herself a home. She goes to kind of reach for a door, but the main Lois tells her, or the leader of the Lois's tells her, no, you can't go into that room. So she, of course, being the Lois Lane that she is, and pretty much any Lois Lane for that matter, is really curious about that room. So she ends up finding a way to sneak in there, but she can't get the information she wants because the main file is not on that ship. It's at their main hub. So in the midst of all this, they managed to locate Clark and Piddly. And I'm saying Piddly so I don't have to say the whole name because I keep getting tongue twisted by it. But they locate them. Lois is kind of noticing that the other Loises are kind of hostile when it comes to Clark, and she's wanting to know why, but they end up locking her in this tube and saying that you don't know Clark as well as you think you do. So they kind of take Jimmy with them, leave her on the ship, and when they exit the ship, they do find Clark and Mr. Piddly. Clark actually happens to grab him and is able to, well, seemingly subdue him, but he gets out of Clark's grasp. I can't remember how he did it, but he ends up doing his magic and gets out of his grasp. And the Lois is pretty much like blast on sight because they pull out these guns that have like these green lasers, and we all should know what those green lasers are. They hit Superman with the lasers, and he's pretty much weakened. Obviously, they're kryptonite lasers, so he's. And again, this is his first time dealing with kryptonite. So last week he dealt with red sunlight, and this week he dealt with kryptonite. So he's been hit with two of his weaknesses back to back, and he has no idea what they even are. So we'll see how long it takes for him to actually start realizing what this stuff is. But in the midst of all this, Mr. Mixapilly hops on this ship and takes off, leaving them seemingly they're stranded. But they do have a way to get off. We'll get to that later. While he's on his way to wherever he's going, Lois tries to stop him. Main Lois, by the way, our Lois, the Lois from the show, tries to stop him, but he ends up telling her that he's headed to their hub. Now, the device, the little recorder that he took, was a device that belonged to the Prime or the main Lois Lane, like the first one, whatever they named her, and it had the location of their hub. So that's why he took that. We don't know why he wants to go to the hub until later on. But Lois, being the Lois that she is, wants to go into the hub and find that information that the other Loises wouldn't tell her. So they make their way to the hub. It's this huge, nice palace looking thing. And you go through this hall, and we see all the different Lois Lanes throughout the history of comics and movies and stuff. And we also see 90s Lois Lane from the 90s Superman show. So again, I was geeking out. But we find out that what Mr. Mixapilly wants is his hat. Now, the hat that he has is like a little cartoon, what's it, like a fedora or something like that? Is the same hat from the 90s Mr. Mixapilly. He wore that hat too. And for whatever reason, this hat is like the key to him unlocking all his powers. So once he gets his hat on his head, he's pretty much all powerful. He was weakened before. And he turns on Lois. Now, Superman and the other Lois end up appearing to help her. Superman and Lois have this nice heart-to-heart moment, and then they have their first kiss, and it's really nice. They have their kiss and everything, but then there's like chaos going on in the background because they're fighting Mr. Mixapilly in the background. So they pretty much, it doesn't take too much effort. Clark has to kind of distract him, and Lois gets the hat off of him, and then he's depowered again, and they pretty much put the cuffs on him. Now, before I continue, I do want to notate back in the 90s when Clark dealt with Mr. Mixapilly, it was vastly different because he wasn't weakened. Like, he was pretty much all powerful the whole time Clark dealt with him. And I'll also say this, the way Clark dealt with him was different because he couldn't just take a hat off and beat him, nor could he beat him by punching him. Mr. Mixapilly basically showed up and Clark had to trick him into saying his name backwards, or spelling his name backwards, I believe 3 times. And basically the whole episode was Clark finding different ways to outsmart him. So he would outsmart him and have him say his name backwards, and he would go away for like 3 months, and then he'd come back again, and then Clark would outsmart him again, and then go away for 3 months and come back again. So eventually Clark kind of got tired of the routine, and I think he ended up working out some type of deal with him that if he tricked him this time, then he would pretty much be gone for like good, I guess. And he ended up tricking him. Now that episode was, again, I said Mr. Mixapilly was annoying, but it was a really good episode because what it did is it showed or it showcased Clark's ability to use his brain in situations. Usually we don't see Superman think things through a lot in terms of, and I guess in his adventures and stuff. Superman's there to punch stuff and, you know, look cool, I guess. Punch stuff, be all powerful, not take any damage, you know, that kind of thing. That he's a tank. But you don't really get to see Clark's intelligence that often, so that was a rare opportunity where you got to see Superman's intelligence as opposed to just his strength. And I'm not saying that this episode was bad, because this was a really good episode of My Adventures with Superman, but it doesn't give you the ability to see Clark showcase his intelligence as much. Again, it's not like it's gonna have to, it can't be a one-for-one copy of that show, but I'm just saying it's definitely different. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I guess I'm just used to seeing how the character was handled back then. But as it is, like I said, this is a very different Mr. Mixapilly. So, it's to be expected. Now, the stinger of this episode is Lois at the end of the episode has this little orb, and it has the information she wants about Clark. And all it is really is that she finds out that there are evil Supermen across the multiverse. Something we all really knew already. And it gives her this little stick of kryptonite. So I guess the idea is that she's going to be confronted with if she has to use this kryptonite at some point, or she's going to have that at the back of her head. It'll probably be a situation where her and Clark bump heads because he finds out about the kryptonite. He's going to be all, you know, trust this, trust that. You know how these things go. But then again, this show has kind of taken alternative paths when it comes to the usual story beats, so we'll see. But really what I'm hoping for, because it looks like they're trying to do sort of a multiverse story, and again, I know people are a bit tired of multiverse stories, but this could be, you know, it could be interesting. And it might not even be this season, it might be next season, because they already have this thing with the General going on this season, so it might be next season. But it'll be really, really cool to see a crossover between My Adventures with Superman Clark and the 90s Clark, and see them work together. That'd be really freaking awesome, right? I mean, I'm just saying. But look, hit that like button if you like this video. Drop a comment to let me know what you thought of the episode and the idea of a multiversal team up with the different Supermen from the past shows. Would you like to see that? Let me know. And please hit that subscribe button. And remember, we have the high ground. Catch you later.